Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Dino Series question. As we conclude our series on the Second Vatican Council and the key principles of the Second Vatican Council, today's question is, do you know the most significant contribution of the Second Vatican Council? In this series, we have been trying to articulate the 10 principles that undergird all the documents of the Second Vatican Council, especially as envisioned by Jesuit Avery Dulles. We also tried to explain also why the council was called and what actually happened at the council. Right? We want to end our series by focusing on what we consider to be the most significant contribution of the Second Vatican Council. And I base this work primarily on a very significant work done by a Jesuit church historian, John O'Malley, who wrote a book, an important book called What Happened at Vatican II. And what he tried to do in the book is to examine the issues, the discussions, and all the controversies that occurred during the 4 sessions of the Ecumenical Council from 1962 to 1965. And he addresses many of those concerns and really does a good job of articulating the specifics of those concerns. Now, 50 years later, over 50 years later now, John O'Malley concludes that there's a lot of debate with regards to what happened at the council. That's why he put that title in his book. What happened at the council? What went on there? What do the documents say? And how are the documents interpreted? And what significance do those documents have for us today? All of that, he says, there's a great deal of debate still to this very day with regards to unpacking the Second Vatican Council. However, in his contribution towards the end of his book, he calls upon one of the things that there can be no debate about, and that one issue is he considers to be the most significant contribution of the Second Vatican Council to the way we talk and engage one another, and that is the language of the Second Vatican Council. According to John O'Malley, who's, as I said, a church historian especially focused on the history of the ecumenical councils, he said that the language used by Vatican II was completely different than the kind of juridical language that was used by the previous 20 ecumenical councils. And he insisted on the fact that the language that Vatican II used was a language that suffuses all the documents, not just an incidental document, but all of the documents. And it actually was a rich pastoral language that the church had not been using for a very long time, and which reverted back, in many cases, to the early church and the pastoral language used by the early church. John O'Malley insists that Vatican II used a very inclusive, open-ended, invitational, as well as engaging language that truly invited all Christians and the entire human family to work together and to really bring transformation to the world. Right? And so in light of this major contribution of the Second Vatican Council, John O'Malley kind of specifies and talks about some of the language that's used and the shifts that has occurred in the use of that language. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just give you some examples of the kind of language that John O'Malley talks about and how prevalent that is throughout the entire documents of the Second Vatican Council. He starts with the whole notion that, first of all, the language of the previous 20 ecumenical council was juridical, that is, almost legal language, as opposed to a pastoral language that addresses concerns and needs of all without any judgment, condemnation, or whatever. And so he says the Vatican II used words, this new language, Vatican II used words like horizontal words, like collegiality, people of God, pilgrim, servant, friendship, brothers and sisters. Equality words like freedom, fraternity, dignity. Reciprocity words like cooperation, partnership, collaboration, dialogue. Change words like development, progress, evolution. Empowerment words, even interiority words like charism, inspiration, conscience, freedom. And so he speaks of this kind of pastoral language was one that was intended to bring all of God's people on board and invite them together to work with the Catholic Church in transforming the world. He ends that particular section of his book with what he noticed as a shift in the language and in key words from previous to the Second Vatican Council to the Second Vatican Council itself. And I'd like to just share some of those words with you. He said that the language in the Second Vatican Council documents was a movement from to a movement to. And here's the from to. From commands to invitation. From laws to ideals. From definition to mystery. From threats to persuasion, from coercion to conscience, from monologue to dialogue, from ruling to serving, from withdrawn to integrating, from a vertical to a horizontal, from exclusion to inclusion, from hostility to friendship, from suspicion to trust, from static to ongoing, from passive acceptance to active engagement, from fault-finding to appreciation, from prescriptive to principled, from behavior modification to inner appropriation, and ultimately from the pursuit of holiness as opposed to answering the call to holiness. And so the shift is an indication that the kinds of language that Vatican II used and the kind of pastoral approach that Vatican II called all the Catholic Church to engage in as we dialogue and transform the world according to gospel values. So I hope this has helped to explain, at least according to John O'Malley, the most significant contribution of the Second Vatican Council to our understanding of church and our mission in the world. And I hope that as we conclude this series, that this has helped you to become more aware of the key principles of the Second Vatican Council, and it has allowed you to enter more deeply into the teaching and the documents of the Second Vatican Council. So I hope you will return again as we continue with various other series, and we hope to see you again to more Do You Know series questions. Thank you very much.